Today on Dark Tower YouTube, we ask and answer the question, could John Farson's secret identity be John F. Kennedy? Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube, where we're taking a deep psychological dive into the magic, the mystery, and the metaphysics of Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. My name is Michelle McEwen. I am your host. And today we are going to be asking that very question, because there's a theory floating around that it is JFK. And when we kind of started poking at it, we found a lot of evidence for it. So we're going to share all of that today with you. There will be spoilers for the series as a whole, and also a little bit of a spoiler for The Stand, but nothing that's going to ruin the entire story for you. But just know we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So if you haven't read all the books, then turn this off. This is not for you. Ash, you are with me here today. Are you ready to talk about JFK?
I'm so ready. Get your tinfoil hats out.
I think so. Now, Ash and I worked on a really long series about who is the man in black really. And today we're really going to look closely at who is John Farson, because this is a very mysterious character with whom we just don't spend a lot of time. And when we do, it's through other people's eyes, and there's vague stuff going on. And so we need to really look at what is provided to us. But the gist of the theory, here's what we're talking about. Kennedy's assassinated in Dallas. He wakes up in Midworld. He takes the name Farson and he begins his new campaign to overthrow the aristocracy and establish a democracy in Midworld and Gilead, or whatever, that part of the universe. It begins with good intentions, as was mostly Kennedy's nature, but we'll talk about that. But he becomes corrupted by the grapefruit and the man in black, which both turn him towards the dark side, the forces of Discordia. So that's the theory. And I know it sounds crazy, but just wait, because we have so much evidence to support this. It's likely, no, we know it's going to be two parts, because we've already tried to record this once. So this is going to be part one. There's that much to this story, believe it or not. Okay, before we get going, Ash, we looked at the idea in the series all about the man in black, that this was the same person, that the man in black was John Farson. And that still is out there, talked about, asked about. But what did we come up with at the end of the day on that question?
Yeah, so it was really ambiguous, and we sort of, by the end of our AKA series on the Man in Black, decided that there's some evidence that the Man in Black could have assumed Farson's role at some point, but it is most likely that he is not the original Farson. If he decided to take that role on later, then that's one thing, but he is for sure, doesn't seem like he's the original Farson. It seems to be that he is sort of an advisor for him, and that is, by the end of the series, that is what Stephen King has said, in interviews as well.
Yeah, we really looked closely and came up with a lot of mud. There was a lot of kind of contradictory statements, or vague statements. The waters were very muddy, and we decided that's just how King likes it for the Man in Black character, and for this character as well. And so there is no definitive evidence out there. And you have to remember, and you might not have noticed this, but when you're reading, especially Wizard and Glass, you realize that we never spend a second of time with John Farson himself. It's all through the other characters, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, we're getting secondary information. We're talking, we see characters talking about Farson and talking about seeing him or speaking with him, but we do not spend any time either seeing Farson ourselves or watching these people interact with him in any way. It's all just hearsay, basically, which contributes to how mysterious his identity is.
Yeah, none of this would be admissible in court, I'm
Yeah.
afraid. And again, I think Stephen King does that on purpose. Of course he does. That's an intentional choice on his part. But we do have this one very solid piece of evidence that we're going to go with to look at our theory. And this was an interview that Stephen King did with Bev Vincent, who wrote some books about the Dark Tower world and world building, and all. He knows all the things. He's one of those people. And so he talked with Stephen King. And you want to read what happened between them on this question?
Yeah, so Bev asked, another character that seems to be one of Broadcloak/Flag's aspects is Farson. And King replied, Farson has nothing to do with Martin Broadcloak. I think there's a reference to the two of them actually being in contact in Wizard and Glass.
So that's kind of a funny answer too, because he's like, I don't know. I mean, absolutely not, but I think maybe they talk to each other. Like, that's kind of funny too, because like that book, you wrote that book, man. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff going on in there.
To be fair, he's written so many at this point, it's probably hard to remember all of the details. But I do also think it's quite possible that in the beginning, Farson might have started out as a potential alias for the Man in Black, and like maybe through the later part of the series, especially once we get to Wizard and Glass, may have changed his mind. So I think that might be also why the waters are a little bit muddied, because he has done that with a couple other people. Like, he decided Martin and Walter were the same later on in the series, and that wasn't necessarily true at the beginning. So we do have a pattern of him sort of doing little retcons with the Man in Black, and I think a lot of it is just to make him more mysterious.
I agree, and that's a really good point, that this was written, we have to remember this was written over 30 years or so, and so he could have changed we know he changed the idea from Farson being a place to a person.
Yes.
Between that, in that time period, so for sure. But let's go with the idea that these people have nothing to do with each other, but they were in contact with each other, so we're going to explore that a little bit more. So let's jump into it now. So how could this even happen? Well, this is an easy one to answer, because this happens multiple times in the world of Stephen King, but even in this series, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Death is definitely a doorway to other worlds, and it seems like specifically Midworld gets a lot of these people, at least from what we've seen.
Yeah, so we have Jake and Callahan in this series specifically. We also have the Vagrant Dead in this series, yes, which make an appearance. And then we have Randall Flagg in The Stand having a similar kind of death as a doorway experience. So we're going to look closely at Jake, obviously, because he's a main character here. But also we're going to look at Flagg, because he's also a main character, and there's a little bit of kind of like King is with him in the moment of his resurrection. So I think that's interesting to look at when we're considering this whole idea of how does this work. But we know that it does as a device in the story.
Yes.
And when these characters die, in America side, for the most part, some form of America, they leave their body behind, or so it would seem, and then they wake up in Midworld restored. Their body is the same, restored, they're the same age, even wearing the same clothes perhaps, and that's how that seems to work. So let's go through, do you want to take us through what happened to Jake when he came through the death doorway?
Yeah, so Jake is very violently killed in America. He is hit by a car, run over. So dies, leaves his body behind, wakes up in the way station, with his physical form like fully restored. He's no longer run over. So his, he's healthy when he wakes up, and he remembers what happened, but that starts to fade really quickly, and in order for it to be recalled for him to sort of tell Roland had to hypnotize him with like the gunslinger like bullet trick. So he kind of loses a lot of like the America side identity, but at his core has the same like beliefs and values, and like innate characteristics that make Jake Jake.
That's right. And we'll see this pattern where the death is kind of violent and unexpected, because the same thing happens to Flag in The Stand. We're not going to talk about Callahan, but he crashes out the window, like, and does this very unexpected kind of suicide move. So it's this like violent shakeup that's happening, which I don't know if that has to be part of it or not, but it is a common theme here. And of course, Kennedy is very unexpectedly, gruesomely murdered as well.
Yes.
So the man in black, Randall Flagg, in The Stand, again, spoiler, giving you a second here, you can skip this part if you want. He's violently killed when one of his dudes does something quite unexpected and lays him to waste. And this is America side where that happens. And then he wakes up and it's like, well, is that America or not? And it's not clear. It could be Midworld. It could be America. It could be a different version of America in another level of the tower or something.
Yeah.
But that's unclear. But ultimately, Flagg says it doesn't matter. Yeah. So do you want to read through? This is where King is taking us into the world of Randall Flagg waking up after his death doorway experience.
Yeah. Okay, so King writes, "Who am I?" He didn't know. Where am I? What did it matter? He began to walk, stagger, toward the verge of the jungle. His mind was as empty as the mind of a newborn child. He was halfway to the edge of the deep green when it parted and 3 men came out, then 4. Then there were half a dozen. They stared at him. He stared back. Things began to come. Yep, things were coming. Righty-o. His name, for one thing. You speak English? They only looked. Habla Español? No, they didn't. They definitely did not habla fucking Español. What did that mean? Where was he? Well, it would come in time. Rome wasn't built in a day, nor Akron, Ohio, for that matter. And the place didn't matter. The place where you made your stand never mattered, only that you were there and still on your feet. He advanced toward them, lineless palms still turned outward, still smiling. My name is Russell Faraday, he said in a slow, clear voice. I have a mission. They stared at him, all eyes, all dismay, all fascination. I have come to help you.
He doesn't help anybody, though, but that's kind of his MO, is just, I'm going to help you with whatever you've got going on, and then just sows seeds of chaos and destruction and wants it all to burn down. But it's under that guise of, let me be your advisor, let me be your magician, let me help y'all. So interesting things here. We see, again, he's wiped clean, but very quickly starts to have pieces of his core identity come back to him. So we see his kind of his sense of humor this sardonic sense of humor that he has is coming to the surface with the Akron, Ohio quip and the habla fucking Espanol radio. Those are things that we recognize as the core essence of this character. Yeah. And another thing that he says is that it doesn't matter where you are. So what do you think, like, how could that relate to what we're talking about?
I think that specifically with the characters that we see die and wake up in another world, they have a specific purpose. It is their ka to be there and to make whatever stand their core values like point towards, basically. And so if we think about it from Kennedy, wakes up in a new world, sees that it is this aristocracy, plutocracy, like there's an upper class and then there's everyone else, and he wants to break that down. He wants to tear it all down, have the fall of Gilead so that they can rebuild as a democracy is kind of what we are hearing his original plans being, Farson specifically. So I feel like that does align with Kennedy quite a bit.
I think so too. We're going to look a lot more closely at that.
Yeah.
But that is a good kind of like, at his core essence, this is what Kennedy does. And he looks around and he says, I don't like that. I'm going to change it to this in a political, governmental sort of way. So that kind of fits what he's doing. And the name part with Flag is interesting because he says, I remember, his name comes back to him. He remembers his name, but then he doesn't give the name that we have known him throughout the whole book of The Stand, all 5 million pages of it. Like, he's Randall Flagg, he's the walking dude, but he doesn't say any of that. He says Russell Faraday, and then that, if those of us who are big nerds know that those RF initials carry through many different iterations of this character, including in the Dark Tower series, right?
Yes, yeah. So RF and MB seem to be the initials that we get a lot, but RF does show up more. So of course we know him as Randall Flagg the most. That seems to be like his favorite alias, I think. But we also get Richard Fannin and Russell Faraday's, this one that we just got at the end of The Stand. So he doesn't quite remember. It is interesting that he believes he remembers his name and then says a different name, but those initials stay the same.
Yeah, I think Rudin Filaro is another one we get.
Yeah.
That's who he was. What do you call it? Jericho Hill, right?
Yes, yeah. When he shot Cuthbert.
Poor Cuthbert.
I know.
So those initials then carry some sort of power or just connection to his essence.
Yes.
And King makes a big deal about names in the Drawing of the Three, where, I mean, he does it from the gunslinger, where we don't know the gunslinger's name for 60 pages or something. We only get Roland's name when he's about to kill Allie, I believe. And then we don't get the Man in Black's name for some time. He doesn't know Eddie's name when he's in the prisoner. He knows him as the prisoner, and he knows Henry's name, but he doesn't know Eddie's name. And King says something like, well, Roland's not surprised because names are secret things, something like that. So anyway, I think that because of that framework that King puts these names into, it's not too much of a stretch to say, like, well, the initials then are powerful as well.
Yes.
And hold some kind of secret power for the character.
Yes.
And Flagg knows that. He doesn't know why he knows it. It doesn't matter. He just knows, like, oh, I'm RF. That shows up how it shows up. So that relates to Kennedy here, doesn't it?
It does. So John Farson and John F. Kennedy. If you drop the Kennedy, you get JF for both. So it's circumstantial evidence for sure. We have a little bit, more that we'll get into, but this is a good starting point to get your feet wet. Is that it's the same pattern that we're seeing with the Man in Black, and kind of with Jake, because he goes by John in America. So we do see that this is at least partially a pattern. I mean, we even see it with Susanna as well when she integrates. So we have a lot of characters that are, after they come through to Roland's world, their names change, but are similar to the names that they started out with America side.
Totally. And that reminds me, by the way, everybody out there, those initials, Susanna Dean, SB, be on the lookout for those as well. That's a different episode, but this is a thing. And Stephen King is very intentional about it.
Yes.
Not just in this series, but across his universe. And so to say John is John, it's the same name, and then F for Fitzgerald or Farson, same initials. And dropping the Kennedy, but maybe he doesn't need to be a Kennedy on this side because nobody knows who the Kennedys are.
Yeah.
So that's kind of irrelevant to him. It could just be that it doesn't matter. It's the JF that matters. And these are magical things. You can't, I don't know why, it just is, or
Yeah.
could be. But the other thing I think that's kind of fun to play with is just the idea of the name itself of Farson, and saying, uh, as a literal device, as a far son, John, the far son of America, the Kennedy far son who's traveled
Mm-hmm.
far. Something like that could also work here.
For sure.
So that's his name. What about what he looks like? Do we have any grip on this is the same person as JFK in looks?
Yes. So we do not encounter Farson directly, like we have said, but we do get a scene in Wizard and Glass where the big coffin hunters are like talking about him and trying to figure out if it's the same guy as the Man in Black or not. And so King writes, Farson was no Lord Perth, but he was 6 feet or more and brought across at both brace and basket. So we know that Kennedy was a tall man. He was at least 6 foot. I think he might have been a little bit over. We also know that the Man in Black is not. He's not like super short by any means, but he is very much a smaller frame than this Farson. And the coffin hunters say that directly, that he was too small to be Farson.
Yes, that's right. So that's a match too. Again, we don't have great evidence. That's the only evidence we have, and it's from these other people from a far away, long shot.
Yeah.
But it's a match. I'll
Yes.
take it.
Yeah.
Now we have to get into the meatier stuff, like this core essence bit, because that is what we see happening with Jake in terms of the day-to-day stuff. That doesn't really matter anymore. It just matters like the gunslinger part of him that's going to emerge, and the resourcefulness and his, sharp, quick mind, and
The touch.
questioning things. Like that's the thing that's going to come back up in Jake, and we saw what happens with Flag as well. So what about Kennedy? Now this gets controversial, so we're gonna maybe rile some feathers, but we're gonna have a conversation about it. And we know that King has an affinity for JFK. I'm not gonna say he loves JFK and thinks he's the best man ever.
Yeah.
But he sure does talk about him a lot.
Yes.
He wrote an entire novel about what would happen if he hadn't have been killed that day.
Yes.
Because wasn't he he was doing good things, he was a good man. We have Susanna kind of voicing that throughout the series, and we'll look at all of this. But more JFK mentions in the Dark Tower series than I would have thought when we started this episode. Because I said, well, I'm going to go look and see what all is said about JFK. There was a lot, guys.
Yes.
There was a lot of Kennedy references packed into this book.
Yeah, there's a lot of Kennedy reference throughout the series. Obviously 11/22/63 is all about him. We do get tangentially with Hearts in Atlantis. We get Vietnam War. We know that King was very against the war, but it seems like through his characters, at least Susanna believes that if he had not been assassinated, he might have changed his mind about that. I think, is it Al also believes that in 11/22/63, but regardless, it seems like a lot of characters admire him and believe that the political choices that were less than ideal were just like mistakes rather than flaws in his character. We are going to examine and dissect that a little bit more, maybe look at Kennedy with a bit more of a critical eye, but yeah, we do see he pops up a lot in this series.
He's all over it. And through Susanna's viewpoint, who was somebody who was in the civil rights movement fighting for their rights, it makes sense that she would look to this man and say, he's a great man. He's a good man. He's doing good things. He's working hard for us. And we'll look at her direct quotes later on. But that's kind of, I feel like, just as a like the cult of personality, or like the pop culture idea of Kennedy, if we're just like looking at a magazine, we'd be like, oh yeah, he was a good guy, and he was very charming, he was charismatic. Now these things, I think, again, depending on whose side you're standing on, if you loved Richard Nixon, you'd be like, that guy sucks. But most people was like, look at this dreamboat who knows how to speak, and he's a natural born leader. And he says really moving things that connect with our hearts and all of this. And he's promising great revolutionary changes to this country. And he has this far thinking mind about, like, we're going to the moon. Yes, we will. You wait and see. And like, we didn't do it in his lifetime, but like, we got there, and he was pushing those agendas for like forward movement and a new world.
Yes, definitely.
And so it was a revolt in a way against the status quo in some ways, which is also kind of what we see with Farson, what we know about Farson's political viewpoint, right?
Yes, yeah. So Farson despised the gunslingers and their aristocracy, because they were living their, like, rich, cushy lives, and everyone else was very poor, just like everyone else is living in poverty and just serving these aristocrats. And even though the gunslingers did sometimes put themselves on the line, the way, like, knights would, they definitely, for the most part, led pretty safe lives and cushy lives, and, had balls and things, like these huge parties, and they were, dressed in finery. They talk about how, like, how different it was from the struggles of the everyday person, and Farson just wanted to completely tear that down. And he used propaganda and theatrics and oration the way that Kennedy did in order to gain followers and start this revolutionary movement to try to tear down the old ways.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities there. And even, Vietnam, which gets very controversial, and there's just different ideas. Like, it could we hold two truths in one space? Maybe like King does, that like, yeah, Kennedy was a good president and trying to get things done. And also there were some horrific crimes committed in the war in Vietnam in the name of democracy.
Yes, 100%.
And that's how it always goes, though. Like, we're going to fight a war for peace.
Yep.
It never makes any sense.
No.
But so we have this similarity where we know John Farson forms this revolutionary band. He must be charming and charismatic and a good enough speaker to gather this force, this revolution that is a force to be reckoned with. It is not just a couple of wayward people. It's a problem for the gunslingers, and it's growing. And Roland and the gunslingers are enemy number one.
Yes.
So of course, from their viewpoint, this is a terrible man who has no dignity and could do no good at all. So that's the lens that we get Farson through.
Yes.
But when we are shown what the common people think about Farson is very different.
Very much so.
That.
Yeah, very much so.
So do we want to, let's look at Hacks, because this conversation between Hacks and that unnamed guard and the gunslinger, this is a pretty important conversation that weighs in on our conversation or our theory that this could be the same person. So what happened with Hacks?
Yeah, so Hacks was instructed by Farson to poison meat that would then be fed to everyone, including children. So otherwise, Hacks seemed like a really, really good guy that was, like, very helpful, and this doesn't really mesh with his character, and he's sort of struggling with it, but he also loves Farson so much that he's willing to do his duty even if that causes harm to innocent people.
That's right. Everything else that we ever hear about Hacks from Roland this is a really nice man.
Yeah.
With a good heart, and he's not a bad guy.
No.
And he says to this other guard, when the guard's like, come on, you know what you have to do. This is just part of revolution. There's going to be some damage done. And he says, I know my responsibilities to him. You don't need to lecture me. I love him just as you do. Would follow him into the sea if he asked, so I would. He's devoted. He's loyal. He is all in. This good man that Roland has nothing else bad to say about. So that, I think, should give us a little bit of pause, because it's not some villain that's like, oh yeah, the good man, let's go poison kids. This is there should be some friction there. And in that same conversation, that guard says to Hacks, do you enjoy seeing children under the rule of the gun when they could be under his hands, ready to start making a new world? And that tells us how they viewed Farson as a revolutionary leader, bringing these people into a new world, which they all desperately needed and wanted.
Yes.
And if the gunslingers were like so great and doing a wonderful job, none of this would be happening.
No. Farson basically comes in and is like, let me give you class consciousness. And so, there are so many more working class people than there are gunslingers. And I think the gunslingers very much underestimated their ability to fight.
Yeah, I agree. But they shouldn't have, because this unrest was widespread.
Yes.
We see that there are good people involved in it. We see that, the guards in the castle of the gunslingers are even with Farson and not the gunslingers. And even Roland himself in The Wind Through the Keyhole tells us what was going on with the common people. Do you want to read us that excerpt from The Wind Through the Keyhole?
Yeah, so, this is Roland talking about, the discontent with the system, even all the way back then in this, sort of folk tale. So King writes, perhaps even then, in these olden days, some were whispering it wasn't fair. The taxes were too much, that Arthur Eld was long dead, if he had ever existed at all, and the covenant had been paid 12 times over, in blood as well as silver. Perhaps some of them were already waiting for a good man to appear, to make them strong enough to say no more, enough's enough. The world has moved on.
And that, if that existed, then it's been going on for some time. And it makes sense that as soon as any leader would show up who could do this kind of gathering of the forces, then they were ready.
Yeah.
They were really ready for it. Okay, so let's look at some more evidence from the series about what Farson was up to, and how that does kind of sound like a little bit like what JFK was also up to.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a letter that when Roland and Cuthbert and Elaine get to Hambry, they're giving the letter to the mayor of Hambry, an official notice from Stephen Deschain of Gilead talking about what they're doing there. And King writes, the letter was from one Stephen Deschain of Gilead, a gunslinger, which was to say a knight, squire, peacemaker, and baron. The last title having almost no meaning in the modern day, despite all John Farson's ranting. So what does that tell you about John Farson's politics? Again, King is doing it in this very indirect way to have us think about what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, especially because we are getting it primarily through the lens of the gunslingers. So it seems like, Stephen Deschain and the gunslingers as a whole are saying, we're no longer really barons. That's like sort of something that was in antiquity, but it's not really now. But Farson is definitely pushing and saying, like, no, these people are upper class and hoarding wealth, and that is why everyone else is struggling so much. So it is interesting to see that that is how he is bolstering the public against the gunslingers, and how the gunslingers feel like that's not necessarily a fair reflection of what they believe is happening at the time.
Right, but John Farson ranting about it. So he talks about this a
Yes.
lot. That's what it
Yes.
tells me. He goes on about these barons, and he's using that word on purpose.
Yes.
And we're not barons, but are they? And then we also get Roland is going to go to this kind of it's a ball in Hambry, but he's like, this is nothing because I've been to real balls and the Great Hall of Gilead. And so King writes, the dress of the partygoers, so this is in Gilead, Roland's thinking about, many of them expensive young men and women who had never done a hand's turn of work in their lives, a fact of which John Farson spoke at every opportunity, had been richer. So again, we're getting this idea that Farson is like, look at these rich fuckers.
Yep.
Just like having these balls and eating all kinds of delicious meals, and they're wearing gold and jewels while you all are down in the pig pen with nothing. So this is kind of his message to everybody.
And especially the idea that they all have like soft hands because they've never had to do any sort of manual labor, whereas, you know, if we compare it to like the Middle Ages in our world, you know, workers were getting like burns with lye for trying to like clean, and like I mean, there was so much going on, you know, that it sort of just shows like Farson is bringing out pretty strong evidence to help bolster, you know, the public against gunslingers by showing how like cushy their lives are.
And this, I think, you know, reading this probably at any point in history, but maybe especially now, we're like, oh yeah, the 1%, the 2%. Eat the rich. Is John Farson leading that revolution? Kind of. Kind of. We get a lot here from Stephen Deschain. So he's talking to Roland, or Roland's remembering what he's told him about John Farson. And King writes, but his father had had much more to say about harriers who called themselves patriots, and about John Farson, who had indeed been in Crescia, and who was gone from that place now, vanished, as he had a way of doing, like smoke in a high wind. Before leaving, he and his men had burned Indre, the barony seat, pretty much to the ground. The slaughter had been in the hundreds, and perhaps it was no surprise that Crescia had since repudiated the affiliation and spoken for the good man. The barony governor, the mayor of Indre, and the high sheriff had all ended the early summer day which concluded Farson's visit with their heads on the wall guarding the town's entrance. That was, Stephen Deschain had said, pretty persuasive politics. It was a game of castles where both armies had come out from behind their hillocks and the final moves had commenced, Roland's father had said, and as was so often the case with popular revolutions, that game was apt to be over before many in the baronies of Midworld had begun to realize that John Farson was a serious threat. Or if you were one of those who believed passionately in his vision of democracy and an end to what he called class slavery and ancient fairy tales, a serious agent of change. There's a lot in there.
There is a lot in there.
What's big that you notice about that tells us something about what's going on with Farson and how he might not be of this world of Midworld, even if he's not John F. Kennedy.
Yes. So the end of this paragraph, class slavery in ancient fairy tales, is in quotes, so we know that that is something Farson has said and repeated. So that right there shows, ancient fairy tales. If you're from our world, this just sounds like Arthurian legends. And if you woke up in a world where that was happening, you'd be like, okay, this is insane, and we need to fix this. Like, hey, this is actually not great, and there's a way to make this better. So there is that, the idea of like the uprising of the population to sort of make a new democracy, a new world, and step out of this antiquity that Farson has found himself in. And I think we also, it's interesting, first, the idea that Farson was in Crescia but vanished. If we compare that to Kennedy, he never did any of the fighting in any, like, wars or, any deployment of troops. He stayed a very safe distance away while making it seem like he was leading the charge. So I do think that that is an interesting parallel. And I also think the idea that all of these, like, top officials ended up being killed as a symbol, kind of. And again, like Stephen Deschain said, pretty persuasive politics. We do see that with Kennedy as well. We see the assassination of Ngo Dinh Diem, who was, I believe, the president of South Vietnam. And, that was meant to cause this upheaval of their current system to try to put themselves and their own beliefs in their place. So Kennedy's whole thing was like, he wanted to destroy communism. Vietnam was trying to be a communist state, and so that's sort of how he got involved with the Vietnam War. But we do see that he has called for assassination, and that has taken place. Same thing with Farson.
Same thing. And another thing I think is just that idea of harriers who called themselves patriots, and how that would really just change depending on whose side you were on.
Yes.
I mean, if you're in the Revolutionary War in America in 1775, and you're what's the guy with the friggin' the British are coming, Paul Revere.
Yeah.
Like, the British are going to be like, that's a harrier calling himself a patriot. Look at this guy. Like, who does he think he is? But on America's side, we're like, yeah, look at these patriotic men. So it really depends where you're coming from. And we have to remember that we're coming from the side of the rich aristocracy who have control over the land.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. Okay. Just one more thing to kind of pull out, like you already said, the kind of come and vanished. That just reminds me of the Man in Black a little bit too.
Yeah.
That feels like what he does, right?
Right. And since we know that he is an advisor of Farson, it's very possible that he was able to, like, whisk him away like that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that link a little bit later in more depth. But so similar things happening here when we look under the microscope at it.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a really huge breadcrumb here. Now, y'all have to remember that King himself has said there's tons of stuff in this series. I've laid riddles for you because this is a series about riddles, and he makes a big point of that. And he says all good novels have lots of riddles in them. Some of them are double riddles. And he has said there's things in here that you guys haven't figured out. And I think he's leaving us some breadcrumbs on this one. And here's a big one where, again, back to that conversation with Hax and the unnamed guard. And again, Hax is like, I don't know, I'm not sure about this. And the unnamed guard says to him, Ask not what the good man can do for you, the guard began, but what you can do for him. Hax sighed. Soldier, ask not. This right here is a huge piece of evidence that this is JFK. He is the good man. It's right there. But even if people are like, nah, I don't think so, it's too much of a stretch, somehow somebody from America's side has infiltrated, at the least, right?
Yes, at the very least, because, Kennedy's thing was saying, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, as a way to help gather forces and get people on board with, becoming soldiers and fighting wars in the name of America. Very similar slogan being used here now. And so if it's not Kennedy, it's at least someone who is very familiar with Kennedy's politics.
And there's a door that goes 11/22/63 in the Dark Tower series. We know there's another door in 11/22/63 that goes to, like, there's just doors to this man and this place and time in America that is accessible.
Yes.
By people from Midworld. But it also could just be Kennedy being like, I remember that because that was a really good kind of slogan that sticks and hits people, and it's easy to remember, and it makes you feel like very of one mind. We all must work for this thing and not ask what they're going to do for us. It's a good way to get people doing your bidding.
Yes.
All right. Now, we have more evidence that, again, we're saying this is Kennedy. I think it is. I think this is King laying down a nice little riddle with some breadcrumbs because of his affiliation for Kennedy. But could be at least somebody from America's side, like we're talking about, if you don't fully buy into the theory. And this is a conversation, if you want to take us through, between Susan and Roland about what is going on with the oil fields.
Yes. So we know that the oil fields and rigs, 19 of them are still working. Like there are 19 rigs that are still working in Hambry to get crude oil, but nobody knows how to refine it to become something that can be used to work the machines of the old people. And so that knowledge has been completely lost in Midworld. Nobody knows how to do it. And so this is a conversation between Susan and Roland sort of around that topic. King writes, "But why?" She took him by the arm and asked her question again. "What are they for?" "For Farson," Roland said with a calm he didn't feel. "For the good man. The affiliation knows he's found a number of war machines. They come either from the old people or from some other where. Yet the affiliation fears them not, because they don't work. They're silent. Some feel Farson has gone mad to put his trust in such broken things, but mayhap they're not broken. Mayhap they only need this stuff, and mayhap Farson knows it." Roland nodded. And a little bit later, "This crude oil doesn't work in our machines. It's been tried. It clogs them." Roland nodded again. My folk in the inner crescent know that as well, and count on it. But if Farson has gone to this trouble and split aside a troop of men to come and get these tankers, as we have word he has done, he either knows a way to thin it to usefulness, or he thinks he does. If he's able to lure the forces of the affiliation into a battle in some close location where rapid retreat is impossible, and if he can use machine weapons, like the ones that go on treads, he could win more than a battle. He could slaughter 10,000 horse-mounted fighting men and win the war. But, she paused, biting her lip, shaking her head. Surely even Farson must know, understand. She looked up at him with wide eyes. The ways of the old people are the ways of death. Everyone knows that, so they do. Roland of Gilead found himself remembering a cook named Hax, dangling at the end of a rope while the rooks pecked up scattered breadcrumbs from beneath the dead man's feet. Hax had died for Farson, but before that, he had poisoned children for Farson. Death, he said, is what John Farson's all about.
Okay, so this is kind of telling us that there's been crude oil forever.
Yeah.
And for thousands of years, nobody has known how to use it. And so all of a sudden, somebody does. Like literally thousands of years, literally people trying as hard as they can because they know if they have the best weapons, they can win.
Yes.
And it's never been done before. But now we think John Farson knows how to do this. So how could he know that unless he was John Kennedy and kind of had this knowledge and information, or just had access to some other realm where this is working?
Yeah. It definitely proves that whoever Farson is, he's not from Midworld originally, because no one in Midworld knows anything about how to work these machines, knows anything about how to refine oil. So if Farson is gathering that to do that, there's no way that he's from this world.
I think that's a big clue right there. You know, the other thing is where we end, death is what John Farson's all about. That's what the gunslingers are all about too. And it's just like I think King is also just trying to be like, it depends what side you're on. Like 100%. We've been talking about, whatever lens you're looking through, it's like that guy's all about death. But Roland killed a kid to get to the Dark Tower. And he says, maybe it's Wolves of the Kala, first come smiles, then come lies, last comes gunfire.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way of the gun. We're going to use the gun and kill you.
Right.
If we have to.
Yeah, I mean, we hear several times throughout the series people saying that gunslingers deal in lead. You know, we also hear from Stephen Deschain to Roland. I can't remember exactly the quote, but I can find it and we can maybe put it in like the video description. But he says something along the lines of like, Roland's job as a gunslinger is not to be moral. So like, it's interesting that they're judging John Farson's morality while actively being killers themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're not even... It's good that Roland is not a moral person. That should give us a little bit of pause, too, to be like, oh, we're not just going to take for granted that our protagonist and his family are the good guys doing really good things for the people and know how to create an atmosphere of peace, because obviously they don't, and that's not what they're about. And so we're just questioning. I think the politics of Gilead, which we're weaving into this episode, are really, really interesting, and where they are at that point in their history.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, again, looking at this through the gunslinger's eyes, they have been brought up, groomed to believe that they are the heroes. You know, they are the reason that anything in society is working, so the people should be thankful to them. So, you know, we have to remember that, like, it's... most people stay believing what they were taught as kids, unless they really examine it. And so we're kind of seeing that with Roland here.
Agree. And then the other thing, death is what Farson is all about. This is going to be a good place to end, because we're talking about, well, Kennedy was a good man and he wasn't all about death. So surely this theory is full of shit, because that doesn't add up and people are not buying into it. But that's not true. And Kennedy wasn't very forthrightly talking about death like the gunslingers do sometimes, but there was a lot of death and murder and atrocities committed at his hands.
Yes.
And we're going to just talk about some examples of that when we come back next time, just to say, oh, Farson's this agent of, he wants bigger weapons, and he's all about death, and these ways are surely bad for everybody. Yeah, and that's what Kennedy was doing too, if we want to look at it through that lens, which we will. So
yeah,
I think that's a good place to end at about an hour. Where are you guys? Are you with us? Are you still listening? Are you buying it? Because I think it's really interesting to look at and toy with and think about how many similarities and parallels there are here.
yes. I do think even if you don't believe that it's actually Kennedy, this series and the Kingverse as a whole has so many twinners that even if it's not Kennedy, it's basically his twin on another level of the tower. I think that there's strong evidence that it could be Kennedy, but either way, we see so many similarities and mirroring between the two.
Agree. And the next time we come back, we're going to look at even more evidence from the book about these similarities and the parallels and how we think they could be the same person. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back with that as soon as we can. That's it for us today. Thanks, Ash. That was a good conversation. I think we got a lot of ground covered.
Yeah.
And until we see y'all again, thanks for being here with us. Thanks for liking and commenting and telling us all about it in the comments section. And until we see you guys again, we wish you long days and pleasant nights.